1977. In Tenerife, 574 people die as two jumbo jets collide at Las Palmas Airport. Elvis Presley is found dead at his home in Memphis, Tennessee. Egypt's President Sadat becomes the first Arab leader to make a state visit to Israel. And at Toulouse Airport, the world's fastest airliner is standing idle beside runway 15. The 17th of October, 1977, the most controversial passenger plane ever built is in the dock. The Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. is deciding whether this triumph of European technology can land at America's busiest airport. France's leading test pilot, Jean Franchi, is standing by for the most important flight of his career.
Descent.
And British Airways pilot Brian Walpole is marking time while Concorde's odds are weighed up in America. If the Supreme Court says yes, it could result in hundreds more Concordes flying commercially in the decades ahead. If it says no, the most expensive passenger plane ever built will become a museum piece overnight. Concorde has already proven its supersonic credentials. The world's most glamorous plane has flown to the most glamorous cities. But none of them will ever make it any money. Only one city has sufficient millionaires per square mile to keep Concorde in the air. It's the route Concorde's been designed for: New York. Of all the world's flights, 3/4 cross the Atlantic, and of these, almost half touch down in the Big Apple. If it's to have any commercial future, Concorde needs New York. But New York doesn't want Concorde.
We're mad as hell and we're not gonna take it anymore.
Thousands living under the flight path to New York's John F. Kennedy Airport are up in arms. They're highly organized, highly vocal middle-class Americans. And if they don't get their way, they've got enough clout to bring the country's busiest airport to a standstill. Spearheading the campaign to kill Concorde is Carol Berman, a 52-year-old resident of Long Island. As her campaign gains momentum, Concorde gets dragged into the dock. Official hearings assess the evidence for and against Concorde, known in America as a supersonic transport, or SST.
The building shook. I held my ears.
The SST is charged with doing everything but causing ingrown toenails, and I'll be surprised if the misinformers do not find a way to do that.
Please consider our fate carefully.
Concorde's fate has been placed in an indefinite holding pattern. The risk of Concorde losing its case becomes so great that the British government sends over its Minister for Industry.
Is that I like campaigns to present accurate facts, and this is just a hysterically inaccurate campaign.
After 19 months caught up in the American legal system, the Supreme Court makes its decision. Concorde can land at JFK.
They will fly a proving flight into JFK this coming Wednesday, the day after tomorrow. Okay, that's not going to stop it.
Aerospatiale headquarters in Toulouse is the French birthplace of Concorde. Concorde Sierra Bravo can now be readied for its historic transatlantic flight to New York. The Concorde project has been a joint investment by the British and French governments. So today's Concorde has a suitable livery. One side of the tail fin has been painted with the British Airways colours, the other with the Air France logo. The evening before they are due to take off for New York, the pilots are called to a room nearby.
What do you say to the accusation that Concorde is the noisiest commercial aircraft that's ever flown?
Well, again, I would come back to the fighter planes, which are to be counted by the thousands flying over Vietnam and over...
The pilots must train for 6 months to fly Concorde. But something they've not been prepared for is how to deal with a hostile press.
Fuel burnt by Concorde could adversely affect the weather patterns, the global
When they
weather
get to New York, these pilots will be the human face of Concorde. Their mission will not just be to fly the plane, but to win the hearts and minds of the public.
We have a few Concordes flying. We might sail...
Jean Franqui will command this historic Concorde flight.
Planes going all over the world.
During his 33 years as a test pilot, he's had little time to spare for diplomatic niceties.
So, I can't really see the point of your questions.
There are very clear procedures in place to reduce the amount of...
Brian Walpole started his flying career as an ace in the Royal Air Force aerobatics team.
No, there are many other aircraft, which create noise. You can't fly an aircraft without creating noise, but Concorde isn't...
After British Airways bought 5 Concordes in 1975, it was not long before he was put in charge of the Concorde fleet.
You'll admit there's a risk.
No.
Well, we've been told that the sonic boom, for example, on landing is going to...
Yes, well, you must realize that if we did land at a sonic speed, we would have a far greater problem than noise.
Concorde seems to be polarizing opinion like no other aircraft in history.
On the approach...
What about the accusation of...
False accusation.
Where are the proofs?
No, I think you'll find that's not true at all.
Pollution in the upper atmosphere.
No.
It's been extensively tested.
With respect, we
Right,
have been told
really,
that
there's no danger
the amount
to
of fuel burnt...
Some newspaper stories have blamed Concorde for everything from the melting of the ice caps to the unusually cold winter of 76-77.
Drove a herd of cattle off a cliff in Switzerland in 1968.
What was the cause of the...
1968. It wasn't the Concorde.
Concorde's just a plane for the rich, isn't it?
These people are movers and shakers. They're people who are going to bring prosperity to New York as well as to Europe.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well done, gents. Thank you.
The grilling has not been conducted by a journalist, but by a PR man from the British Airways press office.
And sorry about the lights and everything, but we just wanted to make it as realistic as possible for you. Now, we think there'll be about 500 of them baying for Concorde's blood tomorrow, so...
Tomorrow's Concorde flight to New York will culminate in a huge press conference.
Easy on the references to Vietnam, things like that. We don't want to antagonise. Although I did like the way you dealt with the red herring I threw in about the sonic boom on landing. Very good. Now, we've got a selection here of the press coverage we've been getting in advance. 1,500 cars disrupt traffic to protest at SST. SST airplane of tomorrow breaks windows, cracks walls, stampedes cattle, and will hasten the end of the American wilderness. Just go there.
To win over a skeptical New York public, the pilots will need every bit of help they can get.
Oh, Brian, just a word before you go. Tomorrow night is the final of the World Baseball Series, the LA Dodgers against the New York Yankees.
Right.
You can use it to break the ice.
Oh, yes, good idea.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do.
All the best to you.
All right, thanks very much.
Stadium over in the West Bronx tonight. It's the big one between the Yankees and the Dodgers.
Around 7.
Go Yankees!
Well, I'm having a little trouble with my car.
4,000 miles across the Atlantic, protest leader Carol Berman is making preparations to meet Concorde.
White suits for the biggest hit of the summer. It's the Bee Gees and Night Fever.
Not again. Okay, so what do you reckon, Joe? Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be touching down around 10, so if I'm with you by 6:30, is that good? Yeah, I know it's a little early, but, I'm woken up super early these days anyway.
Having lost the court case, some protesters, Carol knows, are considering desperate measures to keep Concorde out of their backyards.
Well, beat this. This assemblywoman rang me yesterday. Yeah, she had this idea. We take a bunch of kites. Yeah, kites. We fly them over the landing approaches at JFK. Yeah, well, I know, but I gave up.
Across the Atlantic in Toulouse, it's the night before Concorde's maiden flight to New York. If Concorde's arrival is not met with approval, the £2 billion project will be doomed. On the morning of October the 19th, Concorde Sierra Bravo is readied for its 4-hour flight. In a nearby office, Captain Franqui is conducting the pre-flight briefing.
So now for the fuel flight plan. Alors, on a la Okay, so the total is 93.5 ton. I'd like you to check on the center of gravity on the CG.
It's 93.5 ton.
The flight engineer double-checks their fuel needs for the 4,000-mile trip.
We'll have a burnout of approximately a ton, which is more or less equal to what we use for taxi fuel.
Concorde's fuel tanks can hold up to 95 tons of fuel. On a full flight, this equates to almost 1 ton of fuel being burned per passenger. This is more than triple that of its subsonic rivals and has placed Concorde at the top of the environmentalists' blacklist.
Sorry to interrupt, Jean, but
JFK Airport is surrounded by large residential areas.
We have some problems with the local population.
Concorde's battle for the hearts and minds of New Yorkers will rest above all on one thing. What disturbs them most is noise. 4,000 miles across the Atlantic, New York is 6 hours behind French time. Carol Berman has been living in her house for 22 years. When she moved here in 1955, every hour 9 planes landed. Now, this has risen to almost 30. The prospect of supersonic planes, also using JFK, is too much for local residents and has set them on the warpath. The crew for today's flight has been chosen very carefully. 2 are French, 2 are British. They've been briefed to expect a hostile reception. If they don't present a convincing case in New York, Concorde's battle for commercial survival will be lost. Today's flight will be carrying no fare-paying passengers. It is a technical proving flight only. The crew need to convince the New York authorities that Concorde can be treated like any other commercial aircraft.
Before start, checklist, please.
Master CBs, set, cockpit.
Concorde's flight deck is crammed with the latest microchip technology.
Complete.
Oxygen.
More than 100 items need to be checked and cross-checked before the engines can be started.
Control inverters.
On.
And anti-stall systems.
On.
Engine starting. Engines 4 and 1 starting.
Carol Berman finally sets off to organize opposition to Concorde's landing.
Blynack Tower, Concorde Sierra Bravo, taxi. Roger, Sierra Bravo. Visor down, nose to 5. 3, 2, 1, now.
Takeoff, Concorde's 4 Rolls-Royce engines have the same power as 6,000 family cars. the first 1,000 feet of the climb alone, a ton of fuel is used. Five minutes after takeoff, Concorde leaves Toulouse airspace.
Concorde Sierra Bravo. Toute la France est avec vous.
Merci Blagnac, merci la France. Au revoir.
At 28,000 feet, the crew are ready to show why the claims that Concorde is the future of air travel should be taken seriously. Subsonic airliners reach their maximum speed at Mach 0.80, far short of the sound barrier. But Concorde is still warming up at these subsonic speeds. It's the world's only supersonic airliner. To create enough power to punch through the sound barrier, afterburners known as reheats are required. Although these use up more fuel, they increase the thrust by 25%.
Inboard rehits. Selected. And saved. Outboard rehits. Selected. And saved.
Community SSTs are killing out community.
By taking on the leadership of the anti-Concorde campaign, Carol Berman has found a suitable outlet to channel her political energies.
SSTs are not for me. Make love, not noise. No.
She and her fellow protesters have come up with a novel way of turning their cars into weapons of mass civil protest.
SSTs are not for
Carol's
me.
placard has been left over from an organized protest she took part in at JFK 3 days before. A convoy of over 500 cars crawled around the approach roads at 5 miles an hour. This was the latest in a series of drive slows that has brought traffic using JFK to a virtual standstill. But these drive slows have done nothing to block the plans being made for Concorde's arrival. Concorde crosses into American airspace over the mid-Atlantic. The plane is famous not just for its speed, but for the extravagance of its food. Although there are no paying passengers on board, one cardinal rule is still strictly observed. The captain and co-pilot cannot be served with the same dish in case they both come down with food poisoning.
Merci.
Carol has arrived at the house of fellow protester Joseph Lewis.
If we let Concorde in, more SSTs will follow. 2, the deafening noise caused by Concorde is above the threshold of pain. Am I going too fast, Joe?
Fears about the ozone layer had not been on the agenda when Concorde was conceived in the early 1960s.
The impact of Concorde on the ozone layer has been well documented and has been proven to cause skin cancer and air pollution.
The air at 58,000 feet is crystal clear. Concorde's cruise altitude is 4 miles higher than that of any other airliner. From this vantage point over twice the height of Mount Everest, the crew has a clear view of the Earth's curve on the horizon 300 miles away. At twice the speed of sound, the serenity inside the cockpit is deceptive. At 1,300 miles an hour, Concorde is traveling 10 miles an hour faster than a speeding rifle bullet.
C'est l'heure du café, là.
You know, I was going over slogans. Make love, not noise. No, it doesn't sound right to me. SSTs are not for me.
As the leading voice against Concorde, Carol knows that every news channel in America will be lining up to interview her later this morning.
What do you think? I think that's good. Oh, wait a minute. Shh, this is it. This is it. Okay. 10. Okay, we better make a move.
Dig out those binoculars, folks.
The plight of Carol and her neighbors has become the focus of world press attention.
With this. And that's one of the quieter ones. That's 747. So, I mean, if we stand there long enough, you're going to see a lot more of this and you're going to hear a lot more noise. Now, if that was the SST, forget about it. Our eardrums would pop.
To assess whether Concorde really will be as loud as its critics claim, JFK ground staff set up noise monitors around the perimeter fence.
Concorde, New York Center, good morning, squawk right then. New York, feedback Concorde, 52520, descending, request cross winning.
The engines are pulled back as Flight Sierra Bravo approaches New York for the first time in its career. The visor and nose are lowered to improve the pilot's visibility on the approach. It's half an hour before Concorde is due to touch down at JFK. In the corridor outside Hangar 17, security for the upcoming press conference is unprecedented. A hardcore of protesters has threatened to gatecrash the event. With hundreds of extra police drafted in for the day, Carol Berman can't get any closer than the perimeter fence.
Okay, we want a lot of noise, too.
Dozens of helicopters have been hired by journalists to give them a bird's-eye view of Concorde's landing. With Concorde just minutes away, the noise monitors are activated. If Sierra Bravo's decibel count registers too high, it may be banned from all commercial operations to JFK. Concorde touches down at 8 minutes past 10 in the morning, East Coast time. By outpacing the rotation of the Earth, Concorde has in effect arrived more than 2 hours before it took off from Toulouse.
What did you think of the Concorde landing?
It was like a vulture, you know, pouring down black acrid smoke on our communities, polluting the atmosphere. It was an awesome sight. It was like a big bird swooping down.
It has been a textbook flight, but the fate of the most expensive commercial aircraft ever built still hangs in the balance.
Who won the World Series? The Yankees.
New York does not need Concorde. JFK and its residents do not need the Concorde.
While Concorde is being checked over outside, its crew confront the press in Hangar 17.
New York and for Concorde. I'm told that the New York Yankees won the World Series last night after all that they have been through. And Concorde's here today after all we've been through, and it has been a lot. New York is the city on the western side of the Atlantic for which Concorde was designed.
It's going to be devastating. This aircraft has flunked every hearing test it's had.
The opening salvo of questions does not bode well for Concorde.
Question is, does Jean-Franchi feel that people living around Kennedy have a right to be afraid and fear for the airplane?
if they believe what they read about it, they have a right to be afraid of. But what I question is what they read about it.
It's gonna ruin our city. You know, we don't need the Concorde. JFK doesn't need the Concorde. The people of New York don't need the Concorde.
The average speed, therefore...
While the flight crew face a barrage of questions, Concorde's PR team execute their master plan to let the plane and its media critics stand face to face.
We'll stop the talking for just a few minutes till they put the airplane in and turned off the tractor. Our lovely bird has arrived, so we'll be quiet for a minute.
With many journalists awestruck by their first look at Concorde, the odds of it getting a favorable press start to shift in the airplane's favor.
This is just a ploy by the airlines. Well, the press is still interested, and it's all gonna change.
Now backed by Concorde, the mood among the flight crew becomes more confident.
Well, it's about the 600 landing I've done on the aircraft, and it looked like all the others. And the runway looked like a runway to me. And to be honest with you, I didn't fly a special approach for New York. I don't want to treat the people in New York any better than I treat the people in Toulouse, my hometown.
This is proven to be one of the world's noisiest aircrafts, if not the noisiest.
Concorde and its crew are holding up well under press scrutiny, but it still faces one crucial test that Carol is sure will vindicate her campaign: its takeoff.
What do you think will happen at takeoff tomorrow?
I'm confident that tomorrow the noise monitors here will register very high.
The beat the meter business is not the object of the exercise. It is to satisfy the communities that we are going to be a good neighbor.
Critics accuse Concorde of having the loudest takeoff of any civilian aircraft in service. If it registers higher than the legal limit of 112 decibels, Concorde will be dragged through the American legal system for a second time. But even when Concorde's afterburners are activated, the noise monitors are not even triggered. Concorde finally passes its New York hearing test, silencing its critics. The anti-Concorde campaign may have stalled, but with all the press exposure she's gained, Carol Berman's political ambitions take off. In 1979, she's elected to the US Senate. After paying its way for 26 years on the Transatlantic route, Concorde made its final landing at London Heathrow in 2003. With this revolutionary aircraft destined to become a museum exhibit, all hopes of future supersonic civilian flight remain grounded. For the time being.